Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be upcycling a pair of jeans into a mini skirt. We're also going to be adding custom accordion style pleats up front with eyelets and cord, so you can make adjustments as you wear them. And this is a super easy upcycle project, so if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you need one pair of pants, and you could use any style of pants for this project. And if you don't have a pair of pants laying around, you can also use shorts. Going along with the pants or shorts, you'll need up to 28 eyelets. We're going to be putting these on the sides of the pleats, and you can get these in any size. But I'll get more into that once we start installing them. You'll need 1 to 2 yards of cord or lace. I'm going to be using a standard paracord. It comes in a variety of colors, it's durable, and it's very easy to work with. And the final supply is extra fabric. I'm going to be using this to make the pleats. It is optional because if you're using a pair of pants and you're cutting off the bottoms, you can actually use that fabric as your extra fabric. For the moment, we can place the extra supplies off to the side and focus on the pants or shorts. The first thing you want to do is determine how long you want to make the skirt. I'm going to be making a mini skirt, so I'll be cutting down about 5 inches from the center seam. This will give me enough room so I can overlap the sides, and then I'll trim the rest from there. So if you're not certain, I recommend cutting a little bit more than what you think. And by that, I mean cutting a little bit further away from the center seam because you can always trim it down. If you are using pants, you'll have extra fabric left over, so you can place it off to the side for future projects or the pleats. The next thing we're going to do is dethread the inseam. Try to keep it as neat as possible because we will be using that edge in future steps. To get these two panels to overlap, we're going to dethread the entire center seam all the way up to the bottom of the fly. This one may take a little bit of work because there's a lot of tack stitching towards that bottom edge, but once you get it, then these panels can overlap perfectly. Flip it around to the back side, then we're going to dethread the curved portion of the center seam. So starting at the bottom, we're going to dethread up the seam until it starts to straighten out. It should be right around the bottom edge of the pockets. And you know you'll want far enough when you can overlap these panels perfectly flat without bunching. So what we're going to do is overlap the panels, fold in the side edge, and place a few pins. And this is why we try to keep those seams intact, because we're going to be stitching directly back over those seams on both sides. Flip it around to the front and do the same thing. Pull the panels so they're overlapping, place a few pins. And if you have a little gap at the bottom, that means you can dethread more of the center seam to get those panels to perfectly overlap. Once you're ready, we're going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch these panels together. And I'm stitching directly on top of the old stitch paths. After stitching, it's okay if some of the overlap at the bottom is hanging past the bottom edge. This is pretty common when you're overlapping two curved panels like this, so what we're going to do is turn it to the side and just cut it flush with the bottom. Next, we're going to flip it inside out and cut off the excess fabric on the inside. What I'm doing is just cutting it up about 1/4 inch away from the seam. Since there is a stitch locking down this seam, we don't have to worry about the seam too much. It's just going to fray over time, but that's about it. Flip the right sides back out, and at this point, you can be totally done. If you're not trying to add the pleats and you just want a mini skirt, it's pretty much done. The last thing you need to do is clean up the bottom edge by hemming it. Or if you're going for more of a raw edge look, then you're just going to stitch all the way along that bottom edge to lock down the side seams and to prevent it from unraveling. But I'm going to keep moving right along with the modifications, and the next thing we have to do is cut the paths for the pleats. You could make these pleats any size. I'm going to be trying to go up as far as possible, and I'm trying to make it in the center of the panel without going too close to the pocket. Again, you don't have to make them this high. You can shorten them up or make them any size you would like. If you are making them on the larger size, you're going to want to watch out for the pocket lining. Sometimes the outside edge of the lining will attach to the fly, so you'll have to watch out for that when you're cutting your pleat. Also, we're only cutting through the front panel and not the back panel. From here, we're going to cut the fabric for the pleat, and I'm cutting mine in just a basic triangle. The idea behind this is that the outside edges will fold inward and they'll meet up at the top. So the wider you make the bottom of the triangle, the bigger the pleat will be. Take one of the panels, line it up with the cut path, and as you can see, mine is a lot longer than the cut path. This is totally fine. I'm going to be trimming it up after I sew it on. Place the right side together, remove the center flap off to the side, and we're going to do the same thing for the opposite side. Place the right side together, then we're going to stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way up to the top of the cut path. You can start to get an idea of how wide the pleat's going to be. If it's not wide enough, you can dethread it, make the triangle bigger, and re-stitch it. From here, we're going to flip the wrong sides back out, grab the opposite edge of the triangle, and line it up with the inside edge of the flap. This is the opposite side of your cut path. Place the right side together and repeat this process for the opposite pleat. It's best to place a few pins so the layers aren't stitching around, and then we're going to stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way through the point at the top. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to flip the right sides back out and start to move that pleat towards the inside, lining up the outside pants material perfectly with the pleat material. Again, it is best to use pins so these layers don't shift around and they stay perfectly lined up. For this stitch, we're going to be pinching those layers together and adding a top stitch all the way around the outside edge for both of the pleats. This stitch will be very visible, so it's best to take your time and make it as neat as possible. As you can see, after adding that stitch, it really separates the two layers and you can start to see that pleat come together. To really bring it together and make it more uniform, we're going to flip the wrong sides back out, center the pleat so there's even fabric on both sides of that cut mark. It may take a little bit of moving around, shifting that fabric back and forth to get it lined up. Once you're satisfied with the alignment, we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous step. We're going to pinch both those layers together, and this is just the pleat layer, and add a stitch to all those edges. And remember, we're only sewing the pleat fabric and not the outside pants material. This stitch is not mandatory, but it really brings out that accordion look on the inside of the pleat, and overall makes it more uniform for when you're wearing it. I have a lot of fabric hanging off the bottom edge, a lot more than I need. I do want a little bit because I'm going to be hemming that bottom edge just on the pleat section. So I'll want to keep about an inch of extra fabric so I can roll that edge over twice. This may vary based on the size of your pleat, so just keep that in mind when you're trimming off the excess fabric. But if you're going for a raw edge all the way around, then you can cut it flush with the bottom edge of the skirt. I want a clean edge just in that pleat area, so I'm going to roll the edge over twice, pin it down, and add a top stitch. When it comes to adding the stitch, you want to spread those pleats out as much as possible so you don't accidentally stitch the skirt fabric. Feel free to add more than one stitch or even add a decorative stitch. With the pleats all sewn up and complete, we're going to move to the bottom edge. I want this bottom edge to fray over time and look nice, but I need to seal off the side seams, so what I'm going to do is spread out the pleats and stitch as close as I can to the bottom edge with just a regular straight stitch. It may look kind of pointless, but this stitch will block the fabric from unraveling and it will just fray up to that stitch, but it'll also lock down those side seams and the center seams. But over time, once this skirt goes through the wash a few times, this bottom edge will start to fluff up and look real nice. And again, if you don't want this look, you can hem that entire bottom edge, but you want to hem it when you're doing the pleats. But that's the fun thing about it, you can make multiple with different looks. Moving right along to the next step, we'll be adding eyelets. You can use any size eyelets. I switched mine up to a smaller size because I thought it looked better with this skirt style. I like to first lay the eyelets out to get an idea of the spacing and how it looks. Keep in mind, these eyelets are going to only be going through the two layers. It's going to be the skirt layer and then the inside layer of the pleat, except for the two near the top because there's not enough flap for the eyelet to fit on, so we're going to be going directly through the skirt. The second option is just to start the eyelets a little bit lower where the flap is a little bit larger. But anyways, once you're happy with the placement, we're going to mark each eyelet, mirror on the opposite side of the pleat, and then we're going to do the same thing for the second pleat. And I found they don't have to be perfectly lined up, just close. I'll be using a hole punch to punch out each of the holes. This punch came with my eyelet, so it matches the size. If you don't have a punch, you can also use scissors. It works just as good. You mainly want to make sure you don't accidentally cut through the back panel. We are getting pretty close to completing the project. The next thing we have to do is install the eyelets. I'll be using a basic hammer die. If you don't want to use a hammer die, you can use a press or pliers. To install the eyelets, we're going to be feeding the right side of the eyelet through the right side of the fabric. Placing that portion of the eyelet on the base, add the back, line the die up with the base, and hammer it down. This method does take a little bit longer, but it yields really quality results. Then go ahead and repeat this process for the rest of the eyelets. And if you're wondering, I'm using a 1/4 inch diameter eyelets. To finish the project off, we're going to be feeding cord through the eyelets. And you can really swap the cord out for anything that fits through the eyelets. You'll want to start at the top and lace it just like you would a shoe. Feed it from the outside to the inside and then from the inside back to the outside. From there you can go back and forth feeding it through the eyelets that are in the flap. Again, this is a standard shoe lacing technique. You can switch it up, get creative, and do a different design with the lace. The longer you make the cord, the wider that pleat is going to open, so just keep that in mind when you're cutting your cord. I actually cut mine a touch short because I didn't have a lot of this cord to work with. So if you plan on making bigger pleats, I recommend getting at least 2 yards of cord. Then go ahead and repeat this process for the opposite side. As you can see, when I go to open the pleat, it is kind of hung up by the shortness of the cord, but that's an easy fix. All I have to do is take it out and replace it with the longer strip of cord. For the video, I only added pleats up front, but you can also add them to the back side, and you can add more than one on both sides. Each pleat is going to be made the exact same way, so all you have to do is repeat that process for every pleat you want to add. It does take a little bit longer, but it's well worth it in the end. And the final step is adding your branding. I used leather strips fastened down with double-sided rivets, and then I also went ahead and added cord ends to seal off the knots and give it a more professional finish. And you don't have to just do a mini skirt with this design, you can cut further down the pants, overlap the panels the same way, and make a full skirt. But have some fun with it, get creative, and let us know how your project turned out. And there you have it, your custom mini skirt is complete. Hopefully this project went smooth for you and you learned a few things that you can take into other projects. And this is a fun upcycle project because you can stop at any point and just keep the mini skirt, or you can add the pleats. You can really customize it to the exact style you're going for. But like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at ProperFitClothing, and until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.